A number of new commenters who have recently joined this channel as subscribers have expressed interest in hearing from what it's been like to live in Japan for the past 50 years. They also want to know what it was like more than 50 years ago when I first came to Japan. And so I decided I'm going to do a series providing that kind of information. But when I sat down to do the first episode, I immediately ran into a big question, and that is, where do I begin? So I thought about this for a while and decided that the best place to begin would be at the beginning. So I'm going to go way, 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 way back to my childhood in the United States, post-war United States, when Japan was still some distant, mysterious land that I knew very little about. Of course, I was just a kid, but I had heard about through television programs, anecdotes shared with me by adults who had served during World War II, and personal opinions that some people had about Japan, some of which were shaped by wartime propaganda, so they were bogus. But anyway, let's start. Let's go way, way back. So I was born just a few years after the end of World War II. And at that time, television was still quite new. There wasn't enough programming available, original programming, television programming, to fill all of the time that was available on the airwaves. There were some TV specific shows that were created. I remember Howdy Doody Time and the Mickey Mouse Club, though that may have been a little bit later. So, but basically, a lot of the programming on TV at the time consisted of old movies from the 1940s. So they would be played on TV to fill the time. And also, there was a lot of wartime footage played, especially on Sunday afternoon. They would have shows called the 20th Century and things like that. And they would show wartime newsreel footage. And I can still remember quite clearly watching some of those newsreels. But mostly I just remember scenes of kamikaze pilots crashing into American warships and Japanese soldiers fighting ferociously, never giving up, even when faced with overwhelming odds or attacked by flamethrowers while they cowered in tight caves. But they were very, very fierce people. And then finally, of course, these shows always ended with scenes of mushroom clouds billowing up over Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and then cutting to shots of the charred remains of buildings and people down below. But, oddly enough, I don't remember at all seeing any scenes of the European theater. Now, I don't know if this is because I don't recall them because I wasn't interested in them, but I do not have images or memories of seeing European theater war scenes. So this is why Japan always loomed very large in my life from a very young age. Now, I mentioned anecdotes from adults, and there's one in particular that sticks in my mind to this day. We were over at my Aunt B's house. My Aunt B was my mother's younger sister. And we were over there for a visit. And Aunt B's husband, Uncle Frank, had served in the Pacific in the Navy. And one day when we were over at their house, I don't remember what brought this on. I don't remember what was discussed. I don't remember if I was asking questions or what. But the scene in my mind picks up when I was walking with my Uncle Frank down the hallway to this closet. everybody's got a closet where they got all their junk. I've got one here. But so Uncle Frank took me in. He opened this big door, and I'm sitting there watching. What's Uncle Frank going to show me? He reaches in there, rummages around, and comes out with this sword. And I thought, wow, this is pretty neat. And he pulls it out of the scabbard. And that may have been the first time in my then young life that I had ever seen a real live sword that close up. And I asked, hey, Uncle Frank, where'd you get this sword? And he told me, well, he took it off of a Japanese soldier. And I thought to myself, as a little kid, even as a little kid, I knew that World War II was not fought with swords. It was fought with guns and airplanes and battleships and bombs. And so I asked Uncle Frank, why would a Japanese soldier be carrying a sword? And Uncle Frank, he got a very serious look on his face, scrunched up his eyes, bent over right in front of my face, and he growled, to cut off the heads of American soldiers. And I couldn't remember, physically shuddering at this thought, this grisly image of people getting their heads cut off. And I wondered at that time, what kind of devils, what kind of animals are these Japanese people? So this mixture, I had a mixture of terror, thanks to Uncle Frank, but also a fascination of Japanese people, because some of the images that were being presented on TV were positive images as well. Now, I found out later, and I may do a report on this, I found out later that the United States actually went into, conducted some propaganda to improve the image of Japanese people, and it tried to shift the focus from bloodthirsty Japanese male soldiers to kind and happy Japanese females and children. Seems like they did propaganda did a pretty good job. But I didn't know that at the time. I was in the age and in the era when these mixed images were being shown on TV. One other image that sticks in my mind was when good old Aunt B, she was my godmother, by the way. Aunt B sent me a nice, crisp $1 bill for my birthday, stuck in the birthday card. Now, at the time, $1 was a reasonable chunk of change. This was in the early 1950s. So I thought, wow, I got to go shopping and buy me a toy. So I kept bugging my mother until she finally took us in the car down to the local 5 and Dime. It might have been Woolworths or something like that. And I spent quite a bit of time browsing the shelves of toys, trying to decide what to spend my dollar. That's good training for a little kid. Teaches you a little bit about economics. You only got $1 and you can only spend it once, so choose carefully. So I went around, and finally I came across this little locomotive. And it was a locomotive toy. It was just a little thing. And what I liked about it is it had one of those wind-up keys on the side, and you wind up, and it would wind a coil spring inside. And then when you set it down, the wheels would start turning, and the locomotive would take off, and slowing down the whole way until the coil uncoiled and the train stopped, and you'd have to wind it up again. But I thought at the time, wow, this is cool, high tech. So I said, well, Mom, this is it. This is what I'm going to buy. And my mother, took it, and she looked it over, and looked at the bottom. She got a disgusted look on her face, took it, tossed it back into the display area, and she said, "Made in Japan, junk." That also, wow, Japan, junk, chopping off heads of Americans, you know, nice kids and women. So there's all these mixed emotions were running through my head as a little kid. And to tell you the truth, I don't remember what I ended up buying that day. I just remember what my mother said about what I shouldn't buy because it was made in Japan. But even though I was getting all these mixed messages, I could, I have always felt myself being somehow attracted to Asia in general. And this was even before I started paying much attention to Japan in particular. You know, at the time, even as a little kid, I found Asian women to be extraordinarily beautiful and attractive. They were exotic, they were feminine, and they were somehow very different from American women. And you know, I to this day I can't explain that because, like I said, it was from a very young age. You know, I don't know. Maybe I was born with a case of permanent yellow fever, or maybe I was. It was written into my DNA somehow. But the Asian female was attracted to me from the get-go. In relation to all of this, I can remember that one day as a teenager, you know how teenagers have bright ideas. Most of them can be pretty childish, but as a teenager, you're starting to physically develop. So you have the power and the ability to act on these childish impulses. And one day, a number of friends and I got it into our heads that what we needed to do for the upcoming 4th of July was to get our hands on some fireworks. Now, at the time, I don't know, maybe still to this day, fireworks were illegal in the state of Illinois. They could not sell them, you could not buy them, and they enforced the law pretty strictly. We knew that there were ways to get fireworks. I think people would go out of state to maybe Kentucky or Tennessee or something like that, some neighboring state, to buy fireworks. But if you know your geography, Kentucky and Tennessee are way at the bottom of the state of Illinois, and Chicago is way at the top. So to get to those locations is very, very tricky. And the Illinois State Police watch the highway to stop cars and search cars to see if they are in fact carrying fireworks back up north. So we got it in our heads. I don't know who came up with this idea, but we thought, well, you know, Chinese invented fireworks, right? And Chinese use fireworks for their different celebrations. So all we have to do is take a trip over to Chicago, Chinatown, and go into some shop there and ask them, hey, sell me some fireworks, and we might be able to get some. So that's what we did. We got in somebody's car. I don't know, remember how we got there, but we did go to Chinatown. I remember going. And we started just going randomly into these stores, one right after another, asking them to sell us fireworks. And in every store, the answer was the same. We don't have fireworks. We don't sell fireworks. Fireworks are illegal in the state of Illinois. So, you know, to this day, I wonder what they told their family at the dinner table. You know, it had some crazy whiteys come in here asking for fireworks. What a bunch of jerks, you know. But anyway, we didn't get our fireworks. But, you know, I didn't feel so bad about our failed trip to Chinatown because when I went to Chinatown, I was really impressed and at the sights and the sounds and the smells of Chinatown, because Chinatown in Chicago has some Chinese decor. They have a Chinese gate and things like that, and a lot of signs in Chinese. So it was really exotic for me. And of course, so were the people. And of course, as I mentioned, so were the exotic looking young ladies who were walking there. And so it was like stepping into another world without ever leaving Chicago. And it only increased my interest in Asia. Now, back in those days, especially in the early 1950s, there was no internet, and there was no real international way to share information as there is today. So people in America tended to lump China, Korea, Japan, and other countries of Asia under one hazy label that we called the Orient. I heard the Orient is a dirty word these days, but in those days we didn't have language Nazis, so we called it the Orient. And we were aware that the Orient was made up of various separate countries with different cultures and different languages and things like that. But the distinctions were pretty vague in our little area of Chicago there. But for me, as I mentioned before, the entire area, the Orient or Asia in general, exerted a definite pull. I didn't think I would ever come here. And at that time, I didn't have any idea that I would end up being here as long as I have. But the seeds were definitely planted. And ultimately, these seeds grew. They took root and grew and became an integral part of who I am. And as I said, I had no inkling that they would grow to the point or take root to the point that one day I would find myself living in Asia and Japan in particular so long. Another thing I never would have dreamed at that time, or even after I arrived here, that within a decade of my arrival, that Japan would transform itself into a producer, Japan would transform itself from being a producer of junk toys into an economic powerhouse that actually many believed would, by the end of the century, surpass the United States. And here are a couple of books that were written in the 1970s and 1980s. Andrew Hacker's The End of the American Era. He said America was done. And that was in the 1970s. And Ezra Vogel's Japan is Number One. And Vogel claimed that Japan would surpass the United States by the end of the century. Little did I know at the time that I arrived here that I would have a front row seat to the entire spectacle of Japan's great development and its collapse by the end of the century. And I will be telling you about that in the future. So the next time, I'll be telling you about how those early seeds, watered by the vagaries of life, turned into my actual journey to Japan. I'll tell you about how the U.S. Army carried me from Chicago to Massachusetts, to Shimiya, Alaska, and finally to Fukuoka, Japan, where my Japan story got its start. I'll tell you about what it was like to arrive as a soldier from a country that was just planting its flag on the moon and coming to what was still very much a third world country called Japan. And I'll tell you how all of that set the stage for everything that followed. But until then, I hope you enjoyed this initial episode of my Japanese story. If there are specific things you want to hear about, let me know in the comments below. I answer them all. We don't have that many subscribers right now, so my responses are pretty quick, and I will answer all of you. And thanks for joining this episode, and I'll see you the next time.